Hello, welcome to this talk. I'm Patrik Dudits. I work with Paira on our managed Jakarta E-Cloud runtime and on microprofile telemetry, but this talk is about neither. Instead, I went and played with a new Java 21 preview feature, the string templates, and just thinking, how will it affect the way we are building web applications? Because even though string templates is just string concatenation, if you think about it, every dynamic request from the server involves some kind of string concatenation to get the result. And I realized with that, we can have like all of our code then written in Java or embedded in Java, therefore full stack. We get a full stack web development with that. And we do it with Hypermedia, and let's first touch on that and think about like what Hypermedia is. And we can start up with very general question. What happens if I've got a user interface, a web user interface, type in some data, submit the data. And regardless of what front-end technology we have, what backend are we using, what will happen is that some state on server changes, and then the UI will be updated to reflect the fact that the state have changed. And we've got many ways on how to do these interaction modes between front-end and back-end. And yeah, we can do a little poll, like who uses what. So you can have a JSON API endpoint and then some JavaScript front-end that speaks to that JSON APIs. So we use that in the daily project work. Yeah. Majority. Or you can do something different. You can have a Java code or Kotlin code or Scala code that defines the front end, and then by some magic, this gets synchronized between server and front end. Have we any users of these? Yeah, perfect. Or you can have something in between. So you can have some kind of markup that describes the view that should be there, and again, some kind of binding to your server side. So that could be JSF, Timeleaf, or Qt on top of MVC framework. Are there any users of these? Yeah, also quite a few. Perfect. So how Hypermedia plays into it. So Hypermedia, by definition, is just hypertext plus more media, plus pictures, and videos or audio. And in the web development world, that means that it is an HTML document. This is what gives us the media part of it, and the interactivity part are the links you can have in your HTML and the form controls. Another term that contains the word hypermedia was introduced in Roy Fielding's dissertation, Hypermedia as engine of application state, which was basically describing how web browsers and web servers interacted in early 2000s. And it was all about exchanging hypermedia. So a response to the request was hypermedia, was HTML, or then any embedded media that comes with it. So the client will be one kind of holding the visual representation of what we are doing, and it should have like enough information for the server to be stateless. And the server will then control what happens next. It will deliver us the next page, and then the next page with the updated form controls or with the new navigation options we have. So this is what we mean if we say that the front end is hypermedia in its original meaning. And therefore, I will be looking into generating HTML with those server templates. Because if I can serve HTML, and with that, I can control what is the next option. And we do remember that just working with plain HTML isn't the best user experience. And we'll look on some JavaScript libraries that may help us to make that experience better. So let's first speak about the string templates. Of course, it's a preview feature, therefore nothing that I'll be showing you should be using in production, but it's great to try it out, and it's great that we have that option already. And string templates look like this. So it's a new syntax to process what we will previously do with string concatenation or with string builders. Yeah, putting things together, but it does it in more general form. So the new syntax at the first sight is a bit strange because we haven't seen anything like that before. So we've got str, which is something. It's actually an instance of string template processor. And this str now gets implicitly imported into every Java compilation unit, so we don't need to explicitly import it. Immediately followed by dot, and then, yeah, quotation mark or a text block with a string that contains new escape sequence / curly brace, and inside that those braces you can have any Java expression. You can only use this form if the string template processor instance precedes it. So we cannot make a string that would have this escape sequence. It needs to be immediately passed to string template processor. And this default str, string template processor, does exactly what we expect it to do. It will, yeah, join everything together into a single string. But if you now look at it, like as we have those two options, one under another, it's not even shorter, right? So what do we gain? And for that, let's look on another example, which uses facility of Java util formatter. We now have a special template processor that basically parses the string as we go, finds the formatting definition, and then applies it to the expression that is right next to it. So this increases locality in a way like it's not very visible on the 2-line snippet. If that will be a 20-line snippet with 15 variables, you would go hunting a lot, figuring out like how this thing comes together, what are the constituent parts. So in the end, you get a code that is easier to read. And like we've seen with that formatter, the string templates now provide like generic transformation facility. Anytime you've got anything that has like a fixed string, an expression, a fixed string, an expression, you can define any algorithm to work on that. The way we go about it is that we call these fixed parts fragments and the expressions values. And every time you've got like one more fragment, then you have value. So, yeah, the first one or the last one might be empty. And this gets passed to a processor, to a process method of a processor, which takes this string template, can return anything. You don't need to return string. So there are lots of options what you can do. And you can also throw an exception. So yeah, for the case of that, we'll be throwing an IO exception or a SQL exception. You don't need to work around it in any way. What will be some interesting uses of that? So the most trivial one is, yeah, I actually want the string template. So if that processor gets the string template, it just returns that string template. And this is verbatim taken from implementation in JDK. This is how it's implemented. You may choose to create some other data type. So you might choose to interpolate the results, so yeah, concatenate the string together and then pass it directly to an XML parser. And you only need to do this dense once. So anytime you will then write XML dot followed by something that evaluates to XML, you will get a DOM document back. But you might be thinking, like, this looks like an injection attack vector, doesn't it? Yeah, and you can work with that in a way that you can prepare your processors to also sanitize the input. So whether they will be escaping things or just verifying that whatever comes in will not break the structure of whatever you are trying to produce. And you will build some kind of parser that, that can handle that. So now, in case of web applications, what we need to do, we don't actually need to construct the string, because what we do when we are responding to a request, we are filling an output buffer. So in my example, I went and created a processor that just takes a writer, which represents the response buffer, and going ahead of myself, and process the template in the following way. And this is the general structure a template processor will have. You want to iterate both fragments and values at the same time, still processing fragment first, then processing the value, and when you're done with the value list, you still have one fragment left that you need to process. And in my case, the way I'm processing value is that I'm using the beautiful new switch expression to just recurse into whatever there is in the template. So if it's null, we can finally have nulls in the case. So if it's null, we do nothing. If it's another string template, we just recurse into it. If it's anything we can iterate, we iterate over it and process every bit. And we've got like small interface to turn an object into a string template, so we can output it in the result. And if it's none of those, we just write out the string value of it. Right, and what do we expect when we do this? At least my expectations were, and I think they were quite satisfied, is to have exactly that better locality. So I can directly jump in ID and see where a particular value is coming from, and have it close to each other with the markup I'm producing. Auto-completion support. I no longer need a special plugin for my IDE to help me with constructing the correct expression. Like if I will be using EL or Thymeleaf, I will need to configure like, oh, these are the names and types I'm using. With this, I've got it in my Java class. So it's what we already have and what already works good. And also if we get an error, it is easy to track your error back to the class, to the string template that generated it. And so what we'll be building? Who wants to see another to-do list implementation? We'll be doing something else. We'll be building a shopping cart, which is arguably even simpler than a to-do list, but it is enough to demonstrate what I have in mind when building hypermedia applications. So we'll just have a fixed set of articles, and we can modify the quantity by clicking increment and decrement buttons on respective row. And at the bottom, the total is updated. Right, you can see the code over here at GitHub. Hopefully the QR code will take you there. And yeah, let's keep it here for a while. And I will just walk through. Yeah, I'm not doing live demos because at the time I was writing this, there was no IDE that will support string templates, so everything was just one large syntax error. So I had to like highlight the bits by hand. So if you see any inconsistencies, that's why, because I might have missed a brace or something. So ultimately, how this code looks like is on the top. I started like, yeah, let's define the entire the entire page. So yeah, the full HTML document, and on the places where I know that the pages will be different, I just left an abstract methods and have the subclasses of page fill it. So it's kind of MVC framework in a way that I will have a page that represents a view, and I create that page with all the data it needs to convert any domain object to a view. So once I've got this, I might start building some pieces that I'm putting together, like a navigation on the top, when I know I've got a title for the link and where it needs to point to. And I use that small interface just to convert it into template that goes like, yeah, it's a link. The way I use it is I refer at the part of the template I want navigation, and I can return a list of these navigation links, which then can get rendered because the list gets iterated and the navigation links get translated to string template, and then string templates get rendered. Processed will be the right word. Another option is just to build a method which will return a string template that can be used in the same way. And in this method, we see the limitation. So where I've got only single item left, the button should be disabled. Yeah, it's a conditional. This one doesn't look very nice. But it's an expression. So you could put in a ternary expression. You can have the mighty switch expression now inside. But usually, and it's probably same as in any other templating language, it's best to extract those away in a separate method or like prepare a variable before it. But you've got this facility as well. The other facility that's provided by that processor is that you can stream things. So if you have this method that turns item into string template, you can just go over stream of items and process it and write it as template rows. Right, and just to remind, the other way of iterating things is returning a collection of these. Now, what happens if we have an error when generating it? The navigation link contains like 2 uppercase on the title. So how does the stack looks like? If we do it, and you see it breaks during the process phase. So the way it works, you've got the string template, all of the expressions are evaluated. From that, the string template is created, and it is passed immediately to processor. So we already started the process phase. The framework is my framework that I shown that contains the writer processor. And then during instantiation of the template for the navigation link, it will blow up because the title was null. In comparison, if we make this check sooner and throw immediately in the constructor, it will break before the process phase. So exactly at that phase that when the template is broken down to the constituent parts and we are evaluating the individual expression, so it will break in the constructor of the navigation link. But in both cases, we got pointed to the exact spot in our code, so the IDEs can cope with it, again, without any other plugin that will navigate us. Oh, this is how this markup got generated. Right, and before we start showing something, finally, just the short words on the server used. So I didn't want to include any specific library at this point, and just went with the server that is included with JDK since Java 9, and just upgraded it to a reactive web server by just using new virtual thread for every task. But word of caution, that server is more built for static file serving, so doesn't have basic facilities like parsing a query string or parsing a post request. So I ended up writing a little adapter over it, mainly just to try the other new feature. So I'm trying to route requests in a way that my helper method will get me a sealed type that represents a method, and then a parameter that represents the first part of the path. So when I want to decide like what method I want to execute, I go, if the method is get and the path with var p is empty, the first thing I figure out, you cannot just put empty quotes inside, because that will be a method invocation. That will then be a matcher. So you always need to put the var then in the record you are deconstructing. If the path is empty, then we render card. If it's a post, then we decide on the first part of the path, whether we are incrementing or decrementing. And if it's anything else, we don't do anything. Also, interesting thing to note, the null case is not the default case. You need to specify it all the time with the new switch expression. Fine. And this is what we have, and I just have developer tools open, so we just see what how it looks like. That's a simple HTML page. When we do something, it will make a post request, see the headers, post request to increment that will force a redirect, and we rewrite the entire page. And now we kind of remember what's the problem with the interaction with HTML. You are losing much of your view state. So I'm losing the scroll position, for example. Everything works. Total is upgraded, but I will always get thrown off. And that results in an unpleasant user experience. So what can we do to improve it? In the remaining time, I want to speak to you about two hypermedia libraries, which are backend agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you are using Jakarta EE, Spring Boot, if you are using Java at all, because they are just a simple thing you put on top of your HTML, and they extend your HTML with some extra attributes that will allow you to do partial updates, because our problem is that we are losing all of the view state when we do a regular request that expects HTML back. So we'll just do partial updates. And they will also take care that if I then hit refresh, then I've got a URL from which the server can reconstruct the view state I was seeing. And in case I've got a more interactive part of the page than a simple replacement, I can easily integrate with third-party JavaScript by the means of server being able to triggering client-side events. And with that, really the majority of the interaction can be solved. And the remaining parts can be retained in islands of strong JavaScript interactivity. The first one I will be speaking about is Unpoly, because I've got more experience in Unpoly, as that is used for front end of Pyra Cloud. And the idea is that it serves it serves you progressive enhancement, so you don't need to at first change your request or responses. If you already have been doing this pure form submission and links and getting the content back, you can keep the same requests, just add additional attribute which says, okay, and when you do this, just replace this part of the page. I don't need to update navigation at that point. I don't need scroll to jump at that point. You do it by specifying the CSS selector, like this will be the thing I won't be replacing in that page. And in response, it expects that single thing will match that selector, and it gets updated. When you add or replace the code, you can attach more JavaScript event handlers to it, or modify the code a bit to give it more context from the client state you have. And it also has like a general framework of handling when things go wrong. So if you respond with non-200 response, the behavior will be different. If the replacement cannot be made, there will be another fallback option. Another interesting thing that Unpoly provides is it solves modal interactions for you. So if you've got something when you want to select the user from the list, with a little bit of markup, you can open a pop-up window or a modal window in front of that view, do that interaction, and then return to whatever you've been doing before. Right, how that looks from the server side, the view will be always the same. The interesting thing is what happens over here and how it feels. And it works like we would expect. Yeah. So now when I click, only the table is changing, but yeah, browsers are really fast and rendering HTML and then replacing HTML. So we don't really notice it. We don't need to go down to singular DOM nodes to update the state. Also, the larger parts give you pretty much good interactivity. The request is the same. Yeah, we are still posting to the endpoint. We get redirect back. We still get full page in the response. And the only thing we changed in the code is we added the initialization code. That means downloading the unpoliced JavaScript and CSS. All in all, that's around 50 kilobytes. And we added this attribute here, up target. Yeah, up as a shortcut for unpoly, and the target. What do we want to upgrade? And what do we want to replace on the page? And we are now replacing the entire table. Yeah. So with that, also, the total is updated at the same time. The up submit is just a flag, like yes, please unpoly process that form with when submitting, but it's actually not needed when you specify the target. Just a really quick run through of all the things you might specify. You might not want to update the history because it's like it's just some partial update which doesn't provide you with a new URL. You can use also other methods that get at the post. You can make your site feel even faster by specifying preload, and Unpoly will just immediately start fetching the next page into its cache, so it can immediately replace the target once the user clicks it without waiting for network communication to happen. Or then modify what happens if the response is not successful. By default, it will replace the current form, or specify when an error happens and probably you are on the error page and nothing matches from what you previously asked Unpoly for. Cool. You can also just specify that this element should always update. Yeah, if you are providing updates or notification batch. So on every response, I want to update this one. That's up hungry. It will always eat the response. You may decide that you want to keep the element even if it's set up for replacement. You can keep it and define condition when the element should stay. For example, if you're playing an audio, you want to keep it playing as long as it should be playing the same file. Up on is like a bit of a utility which attaches an event handler to an element. that will match the CSS selector. Another feature is when you add, when the page is first rendered and Unpoly is booted, or whenever it replaces part of the page, it will look for things that match the selector and attach additional event handlers to it. And this compiler function that can return the cleanup code. So especially here, if you will do it by hand, what you will end up with is that interval will not be cleared if you would just remove the element. Yeah, so that would lead into memory leaks and the application slowing down. So this is the way to do it in Unpoly. Whenever there is a matching element, this is the code to run. And it could be used for a variety of ways. For example, we are using it, we've got a search box that has a time input, and we don't know what time zone the user is in. So we just put like a hidden input element there called user time zone, and the compiler will go and look for that element and just fetch the time zone from the browser and fill it in and submit it then with the form. So we can identify if user writes 10 o'clock, which time zone did they mean. This is example how layers are used. So suppose we want to see a list of users. So we just say, okay, let's open a new modal window, and unless the navigation lands on something that matches this path, so users / some string, then retain the interaction in that window. The moment we hit such URL, just raise a JavaScript event and we take it from there. Yeah, we will fill it back into form. All right, and along all of that, the server is still in control. Server can still tell that something else should be happening. During the request, we get an indication that this is an Unpoly request that intends to replace table, and it's not functioning in any layer. This information can help us to reduce what we are rendering. Yeah, if we know that the client just wants the table, we don't need to render the navigation, for example, especially if it will be expensive to do. And then we can reply with the fact, yes, that with the vary header, that serves the purpose of telling Unpoly, I'm serving you this content because of you send me the XUp version. So it would cache the right thing. So it will know, like, since I was sending XUp version, I might not have the full thing, so it caches as like only if XUp version would be sent, this is the correct thing to cache. The reason they need to cache it individually is, since this is extension of the browser navigation, Unpoly needs to know like which parts of the code were replaced and under which conditions, because just pure refresh would return something else. Another thing server can do is to trigger client-side events, or it can override what gets replaced. So if you wanted a table, but no, we will be updating ID element with ID server override. So this will sum up like what Unpoly can do. And the other library I will briefly touch is HTMX. Which has a little bit more raw approach to the same problem. It is really written rather than an extension of this front and backend interaction, rather than just a pure extension of HTML. And the premise is, yeah, why just a link and a form element can trigger and request? Let's allow any element to do that. It doesn't need to be click. Can be anything else. we shouldn't be constrained to get in post, and yeah, modify only parts of the DOM, and fit well into remaining HTML language and document object model. Using it is the really same story. Install a small script, about quarter of what Unpoly is, but the way we write it is now a little bit different. So generally you are leaving the usual form submission flows and the link flows, because now on any element you can tell, yeah, if an action is triggered, if the right event is triggered on this, then make a post request. And going up the hierarchy, replace this element, meaning that row, and replacing the outer part of it. The other significant change is that HTMX doesn't want you to have the same response. Rather, it expects you to send back an HTML fragment, just the update you want to put out. So what it would look like is, when I'm sending this decrement request, it's a post, yeah, to a very similar endpoint, but the response is different. Rather than redirecting me back to the full view so everything works, I get just the row that I want to update. And along with that, there's another feature similar to Unpoly's Hungry. I define out of the box or out of band updates. So at that same time when we are updating this, also upgrade the cell with ID total. Right, how to recognize HTMX from quite far away. It is the existence of the hx attributes there. So we can do like hx get, hx post, all of the methods. The trigger defines what the event is. Doesn't need to be just the standard DOM events. Can be also a custom event, an event happening on different element, or just the fact that the element appeared on the screen. Target is what we want to replace. Swap is the method that we want to replace. By default, it will be replacing the inner HTML. We wanted outer HTML in this case. And select still allows us to do the same thing as Unpoly is doing. Selecting something in the response and using that as a replacement rather than using the full response as the thing to replace with. Right, as for advanced features, HTMX doesn't have that many because it's really built to be a library to build upon, but you can define different swap modes. You can also work with JSON and probably also interact with JSON endpoints there and transform to HTML on the client side, as well as support WebSockets and SSE and getting streamed updates to the page over either of those channels. Right. At the same time, we still have server protocol. It's quite similar, but yeah, the attributes are different. Ajax request is represented by this header, and you get information of what element that triggered the update, what will be the target, and again, server is in control, telling this will be your new URL to put into history, as this is the URL with which I can represent the new state, or decide that another element needs to be updated, and also trigger client-side events. Right, so in comparison, Unpoly is more built for progressive enhancement, whereas HTMX just tries to extend the model of HTML. HTMX is quite a bit smaller in exchange for less features than Unpoly has. It is the more popular library of the two. It has large following on GitHub as well as on Twitter, and they are very active. Unpoly, on the other hand, is a bit more quiet on social media, but then suddenly they go like after 3 months, oh yeah, and we released Unpoly 3, here are 100 slides to describe like what is new in the version. Yet they offer comprehensive documentation. And HTMX, in addition to documentation, they just released a book, Hypermedia Systems, where they go into much greater detail of how would you go about building those systems, and yeah, showing all of the constituent steps at much greater detail that I was able to do in this 40 minutes. So yeah, I highly recommend that one. So in conclusion, before we get to questions, is you probably don't need SPA for everything. You don't need a single page application for anything, because with just replacing parts of the page, you will quickly find out like, yeah, that covers most of the thing that that my user would need. And in the result, it is quite more productive, because you've got one less layer to think about, one less abstraction to think about when you do that. And you can decide to use HTMX or Unpoly as a backend agnostic solution to get to that. It doesn't make sense using them both at once, but yeah. Choose the one that matches better your style. And in the end, string templates will be quite important of how we do applications once the feature is finalized, because it is too handy. But the new switch expressions are even more handy, and they can make your code more beautiful and readable right now already. All right, that's what I have. Any questions? Yes?
Do you have any recommendation with regards to project scale for these two options?
Whether I have any recommendation with regards to project scale? Not really, because my experience is really with Unpoly, and then it worked very well with multiple developers on the projects, multiple views. It was easy to kind of explain how the things work. With HTMX, it looks a little bit more wild in the beginning, but then later it clicks like, what is it that this model requires you to do? Anybody else? Yes?
So the example you showed us didn't really show that you could only replace values or content. It has to be with the surrounding HTML. Is there a way to just make it even less?
So the example only showed replacing the entire content. Well, in the second one, I was replacing the entire, only the row.
Yeah, but only the value.
If we can bring it down to value, it accepts any CSS selector, so we probably could, but that's not the point, because you usually just don't want to update the value. You want to update any other controls that surround that value to kind of indicate whether action is still valid, for example. Okay, anybody else? If not, then thank you very much. If you've got any other questions, I will be still here for a while, or you can meet me downstairs at our booth, where I can show you Unpoly in practice on Pyra Cloud, for example. Thank you very much.